Latest now on the trial of convicted serial killer Jeremy Skibitsky in Manitoba. Skibitsky was found guilty earlier this summer of killing 4 Indigenous women 2 years ago and intentionally targeting them. Today, his sentencing hearing is underway in a courtroom in Winnipeg, and the court will be hearing from some of the families and friends of the women that he killed. Skibitsky was convicted last month of first-degree murder in those killings. That conviction carries an automatic life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years. His lawyers tried to argue that Skibitsky was not criminally responsible due to a mental illness, while the judge quickly rejected that defense. Joining me now is Sheila North, a former Grand Chief in Manitoba. Sheila, it's good to have you with us. I wish it was under better circumstances, but tell me what's at stake here for you, because I know that the community in Manitoba, the Indigenous community, will also be weighing in on what's happening in that court.
Hi, Todd. Nice to be with you. And yes, you are so right. This is a very intense moment for many, especially people that have been intimately close to the issue, have been impacted in many different ways as victims, families, and survivors and allies. So this is a very important moment, not just for these particular victims. Of course, they're the main concern right now. But, this is also representative of many who look for justice still for missing loved ones like these 4 that we're talking about.
Yeah, how important is it to hear from Indigenous voices, particularly in this case, Sheila, where we know that this man intentionally targeted them, in part because they were Indigenous and women?
Yes, this is a very clear example of the problem that persists in Canada, that societal problem. And this, unfortunately, is still happening today. People targeting Indigenous women just because of their vulnerability, just because of their social status, and what people perceive of who we are as Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited people in our own country. So this is very much, a racism problem, a hate problem, and even a genocide, many will say. So this is a very unfortunate and clear example of what the problem is today in our own beautiful country.
I know that you've been following this case closely, Sheila, and the idea that there's a lot of focus put on the serial killer himself and perhaps less on the victims. This is something that happens often in the justice system, where those who are actually the victims are forgotten or take a second role to the person who actually perpetrated the crimes. And perhaps in this case, when we're talking about Indigenous women in Manitoba, it's all the more so.
Very much so, yes. And I'm glad that people remember the names of these victims particularly. But it is good that we're hearing also the profile of who is doing this to our women, because I think that's might have been one of the biggest things that was missing during the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, is we didn't hear enough about who these perpetrators are and how they can be brought to justice, but also their profiles, their attitudes, and the way that they think about Indigenous women and girls. And he really thought that he could get away with what he did. And I'm glad that people are seeing both sides and multiple sides of this very sad chapter.
Can you tell me as well about the situation within Manitoba itself? You're very familiar with how the justice system works there and what you would like to see change, Sheila, as a result of this case, and we know there are many others.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be harsher punishments. We've heard that, and even a senator has brought that to light in her work. A former senator, about harsher sentences and harsher punishment for people who target Indigenous women and girls. I think this is long overdue, and we need to also have a lot more oversight from the Indigenous perspective on the policing, especially the investigative work. We know that there are only 2, possibly 2, maybe a little bit more on the calls to justice, the 231 calls to justice. We've only seen 2 or heard of 2 that have been implemented. So there's definitely a lot more work to do, and a lot of that has to do with Indigenous participation on the justice system, because we know it has failed, or some say it succeeded in other ways, but we know it's not working entirely for Indigenous people in our own country.
We're looking at the victims: Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, Rebecca Contois, and a 4th woman identified as Buffalo Woman. Before we go, I want to ask you as well, Sheila, whether in the Indigenous community, and I know it's obviously not a monolith, there are very different, opinions and different takes on this, but based on what you're hearing, do people feel that the justice system worked in this case?
Yes, I would say in large part it has. I think that there are a lot of families that have been triggered and hurt by the fact that their cases haven't been solved or taken to full justice. So people are happy in a lot of ways, but of course triggered and mad and re-victimized by the fact that their own cases haven't been solved yet. But this is a good case for a lot of families and a lot of victims who have been impacted by this sad issue.
Sheila, it's always good to see you. Appreciate you taking the time for CTV News today amid this story. Thank you.
Like I said, thank you, Todd.
Yeah, Sheila North is a former Grand Chief in Manitoba with her take on this. All right, we'll keep our eye on that. We thank her for her time.